Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Welcome back to our iRacing Pro track guide here, week 8 at Rockingham Speedway. Obviously, Nick Ottinger here. This is going to be a week where we're probably going to have the toughest combinations we've had to date. Rockingham is a pretty special track, and this car is a pretty special car to obviously keep balance and get it to be efficient, right? So, it's going to be a tough combination. You're going to have some, discipline and entry, your entry approaches, where to lift, how to get the car stable, how not to overdrive entry, try not to drive others, and drive to their pace, just drive your own pace. So those are things we're going to cover this week, something to really look at. And just to give you guys a baseline, I am on benchmark version on this 30 or 40 lap run actually. And with that said, I'm going to let this play through a couple laps in chase view, and I'll also do another couple laps in driver perspective. So with that said, I'll let it roll through. Switch to driver perspective here. Alright, that's some laps. Obviously, chase perspective, driver perspective here. So now we'll dissect these, characteristics that we need at this track, our lift points, how we should have the car feeling during those, banking transitions when we get into our corners. So as you guys could see, chase perspective and driver perspective, like you've seen, a really early lift point. Yeah, that's something we need to cover. And why it's important not to overshoot entry here is because if you're overshooting entry, you're putting a lot of force and friction to the front tires for one, but also the rear tires. And more often than not, your entry speed, if you're overshooting, you're gonna really feel a lot of characteristic of the rear breaking free while you're trying to slow the car down under braking. So why that's important is you're using more brake pressure than you need to while you're loading into these banked corners up here. So with that said, pretty simple lift point into turn one. Like the initial phase we start lifting will be around this rock signage on the wall. You'll have this easy, reference point to look at. Now, where it gets really descriptive, I would say, for where we need to lift is you can change your approach up, to have a straighter entry into here. But the problem here at this type of bend that you have in the turn one is you're never really straight line braking. That's the hardest quality to do. So the more wheel you're turning away from here, the easier it is that you need to get more brake pressure to slow the car down. So that's why it's really important to get your lifting phase earlier into this zone so you can work to a more efficient braking phase. So with that said, I'm going to slow this down and keep it at 8 speed here. And you'll notice as soon as I cross that rock logo, I'm lifting. But now I'm in this braking zone. Now I'm not exceeding, as the notes, are referenced as well. I'm not exceeding 30%, when I'm running the bottom lane here. And the reason being is I don't want to overload the front and break the car free under this whole braking phase. More pressure, the more the rear is going to actually pivot up and the front's going to, pitch down. So that's a quality that we have to really think mindset wise how we need to tackle the braking zones, not overshooting it and getting our lift points correct. That way, we just have so much more stability and potential on entry, and you, as a driver, have more control of what you need to do at an earlier portion of the corner. Do you need to actually get off the brake earlier? This is just giving you that affordability to leave it more in your hands, and this track needs to be respected. That's as simple as I could put it. This track needs to be respected, whatever lane you're doing. And I know I said this many times, every corner exit has a corner entry in it. And if you're stable enough and efficient enough, you can actually carry your momentum at this track with ease. So, that said, again, braking phase, very important. Keeping it as straight as possible as I can, but the more wheel input I add, I'm trying to get at this phase before I get to this painted yellow line. I'm trying to make sure my entry speed is correct. I'm not going past the limits of the tires. I'm keeping them, in neutrality in the car, keeping the front turning. So at this point, I know as a driver for me, I want to get as I load into this bank in here, the closest point to this yellow line that I get, I want to get off this brake so I'm not inducing a free tendency in the car because of how much more wheel input I'm going to actually add at the full compression zone here. So when the car completely is compressed into the racetrack. It's such an abrupt change in a low grip track, high temperature, and track temp this week to where we gotta be mindful of that. So with that said, you're gonna see me get completely off this brake pedal the closest point I get to this yellow line, which now I'm completely off of it. Now I'm in a rolling zone, and speaking to that, this rolling phase will obviously have a longer distance where I'm in this rolling phase the longer I go into a run. So, early on we got a lot of grip in the car, a lot of potential in the car to where we want to keep it stable, but we want to make sure we're not overshooting our center. So how we do that is our response to the throttle. You'll see this rock logo here, and that's something I want you guys to remember, as a good reference point here, because you will have a diamond quality at this track. You really want to let this car slide up about half a lane to a full lane, when you're on these new tires. And you can see rolling phase, and once I get to this rock logo over here, you can also use this as a reference for the pit exit wall itself. Now I'm in my initial throttle, and why that's important is now I'm actually having to start carrying some momentum and making sure I'm not carrying too much momentum with too much throttle. This whole phase here is to make sure you've actually started your momentum process, and if that has to just be maintained and keeping the car neutral, let the car work, let the car be efficient and keeping the car pivoting and keeping the front pointing down to this yellow line. But with that said, you don't have to stay on this yellow line. What you have to do is keep the car capable of it, keep the potential in it. So once we pass this rock logo, you are obviously seen we entered on the yellow line, and now we've moved up half a lane, basically a quarter lane, or three quarters of a lane you can. If you enter in the middle here, it's okay, but this track you have a lot more grip near this yellow line to the top side of the wall, getting closest to the wall. If you enter 1 and 2 here in the middle, you just don't have as much potential because you're really not getting all the grip and, radius that you need to with the front tires turning down. So that said, you can see partial throttle. I'm passing this pit exit line now, and now I'm shaped my center to having, that diamond quality that we talked about of how I moved up half a lane or a quarter lane. Now, we're really shaping our center to mid exit, and this mid exit to full exit is paramount to understand at this track. So I'm gonna back this up, and you're gonna see a light here. So this light, I'm gonna pause it as soon as it stays in frame here. This light, you really want to keep the front pointing. Again, like I was talking about, it being capable. Now you're finding that lowest point you want to get to this yellow line or closest to that yellow line. So now we cross this light, and as you see, we have a quitty. I'll rephrase that. We have a quick radius that we have to follow, on thinking when we need to get to 100% throttle, okay? And it's paramount additionally because now we have to focus on this 100% throttle moment in this zone and making sure we're unwinding the wheel and getting to 100% throttle as smoothly as possible. And those two really transitions and combining them almost simultaneously here and using the banking off of turn two and making sure we're not getting tight. So here, not 100% throttle. Now I'm starting to unwind the wheel because I can't follow the radius of corner exit. And I would be taking too much speed off of turn two here. So now this zone here, you will notice I'm actually in a full 100% throttle sooner. That's because I had a really good mid exit. But a quality that I would keep referencing is keeping the rear tires on this car and delaying your 100% throttle moment, even in the first 10 to 15 laps, to where you get 100% throttle at these logos on the wall. Perfectly fine doing that, as long as you're exiting straight. So it's just a quality to think on and definitely try to achieve, because you're going to be managing the first 15 to 20 laps no problem. That's what you should be doing. You got to manage tires at this track and this car. We go through it every week. That is half the battle you have to go into each race with. Now, turn three, I would say it's a more simplified version on your lift point. You will see some red lettering, the Rock logo as well, and you're obviously straight lining a little bit more into a banked corner, where instead of lifting and braking like you would turn one, this side of the track, you're going to be turning in earlier to get to the yellow line here. So I'm going to start lifting ultimately just before the Rock logo, so I can actually transition to my brake at that Rock logo as well. So very important here, same qualities that you have for turn one is balancing the car, not pitching the car too much, and making sure you have the potential to get in there as smooth and stable as possible. So you can see not using too much brake. I want to make sure once I load more wheel input to the corner and the closest point I get to the yellow line, I'm not, again, using too much brake or any brake to balance the car incorrectly. Now I'm letting the car stay more in a neutral state of letting the front turn and trying to wrap this yellow line like I need to. Now I set the car into the corner. I set it into the banking how I needed to. I got all the potential to keep on this line. But the problem here is it's a very, very bumpy track. It's a very bumpy section in this zone to where you might feel you have the car turning and you try getting to the throttle, and you have the capability, but now you start getting the car tight at the center portion when you're in your throttle phase. So something to remember is trying to, in this section inside of the track, is wrap this yellow line. And if you have to wrap it with partial throttle, let's say 30%, 40%, 50%, do that. There's no reason we should be abusing the tires as much. Unless you have a short run, obviously, just utilize the tires that you have. But in this, this approach, you have a little bit of a rolling phase, and your initial response is going to be key because you don't want to push the car off this bottom too much, and especially into the center. You want to follow this line as much as possible. So you can see in partial throttle, I get to this Rock logo. I'm using more wheel input to keep the radius and keep my angle on this yellow line to follow the radius for my mid exit. So Once I pass this rock logo, you're going to see me keep the radius, but once I get to the 7/8, I'm going to be completely coming off the bottom. And that's to make sure I'm keeping that momentum that I started by getting to my initial throttle and making lap time and using that lap time and efficiency for exit. So, like the notes reference, 7/8 off the corner, you're going to let this car completely track out to the wall and just use that straight approach to the wall. You don't want to get the car too free. You want to let it track out like you see here. So you can, there's a lot of ability to get time cut, in a qualifying avenue here, but I like to keep the car all the way towards the wall and not using too much wheel load to the left to break it free. Obviously, when we have a track that is pretty slick. So that's just some qualities to look at here on potential of short runs and what we're looking for, what I'm looking for personally, but what we need to look for in getting the car balanced and everything like that. So additionally speaking, I'm going to go to our lap 30, 31, 32, somewhere around there, and show you guys the top line and let that play for a couple laps, and we'll dissect that together. So this is lap 31. I'm going to let this play through, and this is going to be on the top line, and you're going to notice some differences like I covered in notes on what you should be looking for. All right, let's dissect this top line a little bit for a few brief minutes. I'm going to rewind this lap. And our lift and phase, very similar to what we were talking about on cold tires running the bottom as well. Your lift and phase is at this rock logo. You can even do a little bit past it, but preference, I think, to manage tires and manage entry stability, you'd probably just be lifting at that rock logo like we just passed. So now braking, very important. We're obviously going to be running a higher line here. Now, if we entered completely on the wall, like we don't have a lot of adjustability as a driver to stabilize entry. Why I enter at lower in this middle lane is to track up to almost equivalent to a slider line, but the car is fully, uh, you know, it's in a neutral state to where I'm keeping the car controlled. Like I'm not doing a slider line just to slide the entry and then sliding up. I'm keeping the car capable to where now I'm actually just getting off the brake more, but letting the car slide up and use that extra banking at the wall to help straight line my exit. So that said, you can see I'm going to be getting off the brake really differently than I would, on the bottom lane here. I loaded into the corner. The car's obviously changed dynamically. The car is getting greasy with the tires getting too hot. So really paramount to make sure you got this phase here breaking into this banking with not using too much wheel inputs and too little as well to carry too much speed and breaking the car free. So letting it track up, this rock logo is a good reference point to really reach the highest, the peak of your corner. And additionally, speaking of that, where you point the right front and right rear is very dependent when you work towards any type of wall. You want to keep that distance, the right front's getting to the wall, and the right rear is getting to the wall the same exact type of angle, right? So you don't want to get the right front to the wall sooner because now you have to dump throttle out and then wait for it to turn. That's why it's really important to time when you actually get into that wall with the right side and keeping the front and rear the same distance when you're working up to the wall. So now that that's covered, we're going to start turning away from that. And this is a really bumpy section in the top side here when you're turning down from the wall to the middle lane. To me, turning down early like this is going to help you manage your straight exit off of 2. Because you can see partial throttle. I'm not 100% throttle because I have, that ability. Now I have that 100% throttle, really, because now I know I can actually open the wheel up and use the banking of the corner to help me still turn off 2. So very important quality to remember. You're going to see a early lift point as well into 3. Very similar. On same exact markers I used early on. Same qualities. Almost a slider line. But that's just to give us room to work up to that top side. And once I get to this line, I'm off the brake completely. I'm letting the car work up. And same thing. You can actually have a later turn here. You could do many different ways to stay on this wall, but for me to exit straight and keep the rear loading straight while under throttle, that's a very important quality for me as a driver to remember. So I like doing that and using the banking off the corners to help. So you can break the car free in this phase by getting to the throttle too early, and you can see I'm counter steering a little bit. Just one brief counter steer. So that's where the car gets really light and the right rear starts spinning a little bit. So just be mindful of that. And if you need to delay your 100% throttle moment a little bit, do that. No problem. I'm going to let this play in chase perspective, and then we'll, just have some final thoughts. All right, so that's going to cover it for Rockingham on our race lines and everything like that. So, um, we covered a lot, right? This car is going to be pretty difficult and challenging, very driver induced on how we're working the tires in, and obviously how we're just pushing the pace of the car. So it's a tough combination, like we mentioned. Really put at the forefront of your mind managing your pace, managing your angles. You're obviously going to be racing people, but try racing the track more than anything. Racing the track here is majority of your battle, and we have to emphasize that. Driving the track, not driving to race the other guys in front of you, behind you. Just, if you know your limits, work at those limits and stay maintained. Stay in a good area to where you can actually make laps at this track and not get caught in anything. So this track's going to produce some tight quarter racing. And additionally, speaking of that, it's going to have a lot of ability to be in wrecks. So whether you're in the front or back, you just got to manage how, you really just manage how you actually drive in this track. Keep yourself in control, and you'll have a good week this week. So with that said, I appreciate you guys tuning in once again. I know it's a lengthy videos I always produce for you guys, but at the end of the day, it's a benefit just to, do these and, at least sit here and talk you guys through it. So when we do our sessions on Sundays, we have a good direction to go with. So appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will look forward to seeing you guys Sunday evening.